people wanting to participate, and we look inefficient if we don't.
Good morning, everyone.
We think about all those who have been affected by the civil defence emergencies, and even those events that didn't become emergencies in our region. We have many communities up and down the coast, and we give thanks for the work of our communities and also of all of the GDC staff, the civil defence and emergency management teams across Tairāwhiti that have put hours and hours into making sure our people were safe. And we give thanks that no one lost their lives. And we've all seen in the material today photographs of just what it looked like. So as we open our meeting this morning, let us reflect on what has gone on in our region for the last 2 months, 6 weeks, and reflect that that's not the first time. So thanks to all those who put themselves out during the night to keep other people safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seymour. Nei rā te mihi nunu ki a koutou I te ata nei. Nau mai hara mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome to this hui. I'd like to acknowledge our staff in the room. Also anyone that may be watching on our live stream. Nau mai hara mai to this hui. Ki a korua ngā pau o te nōtara, no te whānau tipu, no te whānau pāpuni tūhaka nei rā te mihi nunu ki a korua. Marcus, Kumeroa, councillors, I'd like to introduce us to Kumeroa and Marcus, who are members of our CDM team. We very much know the ones that are sitting around here, but you would be familiar with their names. Has been on some of the SITREP reports that had come through during the Tokomaru Bay events and during our recent heavy weather events. So I just want to welcome you to our hui this morning. All right, we have apologies from Councillor Burdett, Councillor Robinson, and Her Worship the Mayor Stoltz. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Sheldrake and seconded by Councillor Seymour. All those in favour? Carried. Any declarations of interest this morning? No declarations of interest. All right, I'll move us to page 3, which is our confirmation of our non-confidential minutes. So moved by Councillor Seymour, second by Councillor Cranston. Do we have any matters arising? No matters arising. Then I'll put that. So all those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, I'll take us to the action sheet on page 7. Any matters arising in regards to the action sheet? Okay, I'll move us on to our, we have no leaves of absence, acknowledgements and tributes, public inputs and deputations, extraordinary business, notices of motion or adjourned business. Councillors, I would like to take us to page 8, which is our, we do have only one report today. However, there are 5 appendices, I think it is for each. Oh no, sorry, 6 appendices for each. So what I'll be doing is I will be, good morning, Councillor Faulkner. What I will be doing is taking us through each attachment one at a time, so in sequential order. So I will take us to our first our first attachment whānau. So just to let us know that the updated version of that attachment is here. The changes have been minor and more clerical, that's correct, but substantively still essentially the same as what's online. We'd like to speak to that view.
Chair, if we start with just the high-level summary report and then move if we could do that.
Yes, sure. Hand it over to staff.
Kia ora, good morning, and good to see everyone here. And obviously changed through our COVID conditions, and equally what has been certainly for the first 5 months of this year an extremely busy period across our region. Just with the report obviously reflects in terms of the number of appendices there, the ancillary work that goes into the space, both in terms of review, the summary, and equally the I guess the strategic and legislative changes that are across the sector as well, and we'll incrementally work through those as part of the chair's intent to go through each relevant attachment for that. But just to reiterate and welcome my team, which is a new team. So really from January this year, it was a team of one. We now have three. And I'd also like to point out that really in the back of these, particularly the last two significant events, whilst these both the gentlemen with the team have come into the sector, we've actually built capability in terms of what and how we've been actually going about our business there. And we've got a fourth seat to fill, which will be a welfare recovery seat into the CEDM team for the vacancy that will be going into the market for recruitment. I guess in terms of just the summary and really what I've worked through is similar. I mean, COVID-19 in particular is still relevant. It's as much as there seems to be a sort of reticence to put it in the forefront of where things are, but we're coming into obviously a key season, and our colleagues at Health in particular with the onset of flu, open borders, and obviously the latest variant of the COVID strain will present and continue to present a challenge for health in that regard then. However, with that said, really the foundation and the framework that was built with the work in 2021 and equally what the welfare response, the clinical response is put in place for 2022 certainly has really reflected the efforts and paid back the dividend in terms of how our regions managed to navigate through that. Just in terms of ongoing CEDM input into our current COVID operations, it's more particularly around the supporting it just as an overwatch for the Takatu hub, and Takatu is the welfare provision that follows on from the initial clinical contact that whānau will have if they're going into that contact with or having a positive case with COVID. At the moment, that's pretty minimal in terms of really our input, but as we have done throughout the duration of the COVID response, it's certainly been there as a planning insert, and really if required and activated through the regional leadership group, which the chair with the Dean, and we're really subbed in that capacity if required. In terms of our natural hazards, really events in the tempo we've had, which I guess really if you go back to June last year was when the first Tokomaru event really kicked in, and as we all know now, really heading into what I've laid out in terms of this reporting period, the number of events we've actually been activated and stood up for, and that's really as a community. So it's been certainly in terms of tempo, I'd say we've been very busy, and equally in terms of what we'll cover in a bit more detail with recovery for that. Really recovery going back to the June event last year is obviously, as you know, that understand that it's really been a compounding set of circumstances that have led to really being wrapped up into the current recovery plan that James Beattie has been leading with the recovery team for that. But we were, and certainly the initial part of this year is cyclone season. I guess last year we didn't see what came into the region in terms of what those forecasts were. This time, however, really we got the full brunt of really those systems, and it certainly managed to test our systems in terms of response and readiness, in terms of, and then equally in terms of our community groups were the same as well. So obviously the key internal aspects for the CEDM function has been obviously the integration of the new team members into the CEDM response, or just into the team in that regard. And look, as I'm pleased to say, I've got rest assured we've got some excellent work underway with regards to systems and process. The people component really is an extension into our community groups as well, and equally that sets a pretty key priority for us is in terms of actually developing the resilience further in terms of our community linked groups there. We acknowledge our volunteers that come together for these events, particularly for the duration of the first major event, that the 9+ days. That's people that are giving up their time in terms of what it takes to awhi and support an integrated regional response. And obviously when we go through the declared event, we had in April, March, April, that really was the test of everything we've had in place there. So the COVID-19 update I've touched on, that really for us remains, certainly hasn't gone away. We are still obviously seeing cases, and obviously what health are reporting quite regularly on, and the focus on vaccination heading into a winter flu season and everything that comes with it. Emergency Coordination Centre, just an update with that. We are now in the public consultation commenced yesterday, and we have the design confirmed and really for the site. So that process equally in terms of resource consenting has just initiated in parallel with that as well. So that's certainly going to prove its worth, I guess, in terms of the frequency and the pattern we're seeing with the current natural hazard events that we've been dealing with, certainly in the last 10 months. Now talk to the severe weather event, which is the March, April, the first major, the major event we had in 9 days, which was declared. So as you see the summary there, which is obviously underscores, well, probably undersells really the complexity of the event. However, Dr. Cave, in terms of really putting together the detailed summary, quantifiable aspects of really the science and the way that the complexities of the weather system and how that impacted a region, that'll be a report that'll follow, obviously on from the time it's going to take to pull that together. I will highlight though that really, particularly for ourselves, the only saving grace of that event, the declared event, was sequential in nature. We didn't have evacuations happening en masse, which probably is a good thing in terms of the complexities and the resources that it takes to actually initiate that. So for the most part, the evacuations that we certainly did have to trigger were based on our flood warning system. Uniquely, I'd highlight the colleagues in the flood, in the hydrology team and the flood warning office for really the complementary advice and the monitoring of our telemetry or measuring data within the catchments. For the most part, the evacuations happened between the hours of 10 p.m. and 3 o'clock in the morning. And for the day job shift here was really more sort of tend to be dealing with the provision of welfare. The nighttime become very much a focus in terms of having to get people to be somewhere within short periods of time. So we took really knowing that the rainfall data on the forecast predicates really what's coming. It gives you an hour or hour and a half. So the ability to connect with our emergency service partners, the community link groups, we were actually quite proactive in pretty just about all cases to have those actions in terms of evacuation and public awareness and warning taking place well beforehand in terms of really where water level rise made movement or evacuation untenable. Also, just in terms of the support from NEMA in that regard there, we have NEMA really triggers in terms of coming into the regional groups for that backup support that just provides us the national link back into Wellington, and equally just the oversight and strategic advice in that regard with the role Ian and the team play for that. So I've got the obviously on the back of the severe weather event, the recovery transition report. Did you want to touch on that now, or just deal with that as a separate aspect of running after the report?
After your summary, I'll ask councillors if we have questions about the summary, and then we'll go, and then I'll ask if we have questions about each individual attachment, so we're not having a chop and change.
Yep.
You can feel free to give your summary now for the
Well, actually, because I've got James Beatty here as recovery manager, probably
We can do that
provide
at
the
the session.
synopsis as part of that.
Yep.
It's quite complex in terms of really what obviously we've had to pull together for getting recovery sorted.
Yep.
I have got Ian here though, just in terms of the verbal NEMA update. Ian, maybe just at the end, I'll run through really what I've got here, then I can hand over for yourself if you like. Trifecta, which hopefully for many of you here, that should be quite familiar now in terms of what that refers to. Obviously, the work around the new legislation, the roadmap, and the national plan, all tied into that one piece of work, quite considerable. Nadine we've got something you've brought in to really help manage that in terms of GDC support for that. And it's quite at a key phrase, given the tempo and the work that's been done to date and really what the timeframe has from DPMC around getting that through to the first gate for parliamentary consideration. And Ian, maybe that's something I can, if you're happy talking to where that national progress sits for. Just move across to page 12, which is the Sedum Resilience Fund. Once again, we're pleased to announce that we've been successful in securing the funding for that. Quite a complex title there that was put into this proposal put forward to NEMA. But I think when you read that, it probably resonates quite well with in terms of what we've just been through. So the relevance and particularly the ability to actually drill into certainly what this funding will be setting out to achieve for us. This is better informs us around who, what and where, and really the process that we need to reconfigure with in terms of staying in touch with these events. So Dr. Cave, once again, keeps himself very busy with these on the back of completing the current project, which is around the active fault mapping for the district, and that's in the process of being finished off, and then commencing into this current project that's been focused on the weather events and understanding the intensity of those storms in the district there. Final one's really tangata whenua Māori engagement. We made mention last time of the Kaingarua, the Te Puni Kōkiri Kaingarua Fund, which we took a regional approach to really tapping into that resource. So pleased to say that we're really through the initial funding gates for that. I've been asked just to lead that project on behalf of the Toitu iwi chairs and Te Puni Kōkiri and GDC. And equally, the project team were formed in that regard, are obviously reflective of that representation. We've also got Department of Internal Affairs with the Lottery Commission's grant as part of the project team, and the logic there is that really there are a number of community groups seeking lottery grant assistance for the same kaupapa, which is around provision of emergency equipment and supplies. By bringing them or lotteries into the equation with us, it allows us to get really that same application of the methodology to ensure that we can actually leverage that to better service the gaps that we come across within the current framework we've set out there. So it's actually designed to enhance, I think, really for all of us as a region, as emergency services. It's not a CEDM-owned asset. These resources, they actually belong to iwi and to the community. Our role is to make sure that people understand how to use it, they're activated with it, or how to activate it, I should say, supporting it with training, and that's from all of us as emergency service providers, and really ensuring that we've got the ability to really then take it to the next layer, which is the small, the other groups that haven't been considered in terms of this first round of funding. So Councillor Pat raised last time, I think rural and small remote rural communities. That's something I think our lotteries, without setting them up to anything, but for consideration for those sort of smaller scenarios. That's probably about the main things for me. I see climate change there. That's really, I think, a broader subject within council in terms of what perhaps Nadine can talk to, but certainly in our space, really our current modelling, no doubt will, in terms of what we're going through with our group plan review, which is not so much a review of the hazards, we already know what the hazards are, but it's a review of the impacts that those hazards have, and there'd be a climate change modifier to flood modelling, for example, and the type of events and what that science provides the opportunity to revise what we put out there as the products for them. Kia ora.
Cool, thank you very much, Mr. Green. Are there any questions in regards to any of the information in the summary that's not about any of the attachment things? So that will take us to the attachments. But Councillor Seymour, then Councillor Foster, Councillor Cranston.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you always to Mr. Green for the work that the team does. My question really goes to the Chief Executive, and it's on the front page, 8. And we see this at the moment as an issue of low significance in accordance with our council policy. And I would imagine a number of times this is beginning to pull up, and it's a separate question to the report, but it relates to the report. When will we perhaps have a review of that? And is this not a medium issue now for Tairāwhiti rather than low? And what weight or what are the elements? And you'd come back to us with another report, I guess, that need to be taken into account to shift it up a notch.
So through the chair, the sentence that's been referred to is the bottom page of the cover report. So it's a guide for staff in terms of their assessment of whether or not the decision that is required in the report is of high significance or not. So yes, the content of the report and the matters that are being discussed are of high significance to the district as a consequence of what outcomes may arise, but the report itself with the information doesn't trigger our policy, our significance and engagement policy, which is the purpose of that sentence there. So if it was a high significance, we would expect that we would have had a look at our policy and undertaken any engagement that's required around that. We'll be asking the question, but because it's an information report, it's of low significance. So it's really just a procedural sentence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and yeah, congratulations on all the great work that the team is doing. I did see firsthand the cleanup up at Toko, and I just noted the importance of the marae in that situation for storage of food and for a place of safety. And that obviously is the marae are obviously the key places for our coastal community in particular. And what kind of resilience help does that do the marae get for being part of the CDM group? I should imagine, because the marae and also the rugby club was another classic place that was really needed for food and everything like that. So those community bases are so important for the resilience of the coast for future events, aren't they? So yeah, just to make a comment of what kind of input or help do the marae have in this situation to be able to cater for these events?
Yeah, kia ora, and equally I'd echo the way that particularly marae and our iwi partners come into the aspect of response in these type of scenarios. So the reference, and I made within the comment around the area of the report around iwi tangata whenua, particularly reinforces, I guess, the critical nature of how our community hubs come to play. Now, that particular project that's been funded is looking to resource, and this is what will be commencing with procurement in this current period now, which we're underway with, for the emergency service pods that go into our marae locations throughout the whole region. Not all marae, that's roughly in the magnitude around 20 plus. One of the key considerations, however, and Tukumotu Bay is a good example, certainly for a flood event, it has the ability to actually sustain and provide a place of safety for the community to go to. If you had a tsunami 5th of March event, really sadly for a lot of our low-lying coastal marae, they're well within the inundation zones that we go through. What that means, though, however, is the community engagement piece we're taking forward, particularly with our community link, which community link is really inclusive of community, but particularly with our iwi and those hubs being quite central to it, is where the hazard modelling in particular then applies to where we resource, particularly in a strategic sense, we resource where those assets will be deployed to. So we've got the map for that. The consultation for it, I guess the challenge was really getting, we've got marae clusters or within a rohinga actually agreeing to the fact that it's not everyone's going to get the container. It's based on the science in the Mātauranga Māori that we've engaged as a collaborative effort with our hapu. That's where really we've landed on the solution and why this project is quite key in terms of doing that. However, in the flooding sense there, particularly where there's been a response taking place, that's certainly where it's supported both through the manner that we bring welfare in and manage it through that hub. And equally, a koha and recognition of the use of that facility or that place in terms of recognising that is actually forming a central part of that either response or the welfare.
So thank you very much, Mr. Green. Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, thanks for that. I realised just how significant this was for the coast and Tukumaru, and that's where the heart of the emergency lay. But the report is headed assessment of the 20th of June 21 weather event. There were significant events in the urban area as well, and I've had requests from, as an aftermath of that, what's happening in those instances of risk and threat to property, and even to a degree life within the urban environment. But this is, as an assessment of the weather event, it's very quiet on the urban area.
Shall I bring us to this attachment now? Because like we were going through the just the summary stuff. So shall we move us to this attachment, have staff speak to it, because that part could also be in comfortable with them. speaking
Whenever
that
it
part?
suits. Yeah.
One was appetizer.
All right, well, I'll move us to page 14, which is the assessment of the 20th June 2021 weather event. Noting too that we have tabled a report that is slightly edited version of the one that we received, but staff are more than happy to respond in regards to the differences. Dr. Cave, will you be speaking to this attachment? But first, are you able to address Councillor Cranston's concerns about the city?
Yes, Councillor Cranston is presumably referring to the November event, which was really significant. And we are doing an assessment of that overall event, and some of those areas got affected again in March, but not as badly. So it's an area where there's ongoing work. We engaged the geotechnical team from Auckland University to assist us on that, as well as the landslide team from GNet. And we've compiled a lot of that information, and it's just really essentially in the queue to get written up and assessed fully so that we can document it. Having had 5 events in 9 months means there is a wee bit of backlog with respect to proper documentation. The general idea would be there'd be in a report of the sort of the degree of completeness for the November event as there was for the prior event. And with respect to some of those properties, we keep a very close eye on them. We monitor them after every single significant rain event to make sure that no damage is being exacerbated. And some sites had risk added to after the March event from that November event.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Cave.
It really does highlight the issue we've got in events running into events.
Yeah.
You know, it's well, we're talking 3 events really.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
it's just-
absolutely.
We're all on top of each other.
Yeah, there's a compounding impact regardless, like Mr. Green had alluded to. I also do want to remind us as well that this report is based off, we specifically requested an assessment by Councillor Seymour in regards to Tokomaru Bay's last year event. So thank you very much for providing us with a really comprehensive report. Dr. Cave, do you want to speak to it prior to councillors ask any questions in regards to it?
Yes, I can, but I don't actually expect everybody to have read through what is rather a detailed report and actually spotted all the spelling mistakes, which will still be there. I've deliberately kept this report as a draft because we have not had the opportunity to actually share it with the local community in Tokomaru Bay in particular. We had planned to earlier on last year after the report was initially completed in draft, but we've had lockdowns and COVID going through, so there's a high risk in actually having a hui on site, and now's the opportunity to do that, and I look forward to it. And after we have that feedback and hopefully more information, then we'll finalise the report and move on from there. I guess rather than go through the entire report, I'd just like to firstly stress that this was one where I guess we had a heads up from our own monitoring of the weather systems and all of the different weather forecasting operations that we keep an eye on. And so we were expecting something. We weren't necessarily expecting to see an event of this significance in Tokomaro Bay. And none of the tools that we have allow us to forecast such an event with such a localized impact. The issue there being that for what we call nowcasting, seeing what's happening now, we have the flood gauge system, we have the rain gauges, and we also have rain radar. Rain radar diminishes in value the further it is from the radar site, and that's at Mahia Peninsula. And so at Tokomaro Bay, it's actually looking at weather, which is over 2 kilometres up in the air. So it's not telling us what's going on the ground. And from my point of view, what was actually happening in Facebook very, very early on that morning told me far more than any of our formal systems. And I got wind, I guess, personally, of there being something happening at Tokomaro Bay. I think it was around about 6 o'clock in the morning. The noise started coming through Facebook around about that time. And by the time I got there, at around about 8:30, the flood had already passed through. So that's how fast it was. And so you cannot predict what goes on in those type of events. And part of that is due to where we have our rain gauge systems. The Tokomaro area is what we call a ungauged catchment. And so we rely on rain gauges and river gauges, which are in separate catchments, and try to infer what's going on in between. And to address that, Tokomaro is a gap, and once we resolve exactly where to put a new rain gauge, it's arrived, so we can install it. I've had discussions with some of the teams, particularly in Lifelines, and our preference is probably that it get located at Hahiorangi School. And that's not on council property, obviously enough. It's on Ministry of Education property, but I don't think that that's a barrier. It's a suitable location between the Mangahoini and Waitu catchments, so it would capture that, and it's far enough away from the sea that it won't be influenced by onshore winds. So I think that's a plus, and I'd like to get that moved as fast as possible to get it on site. We did have the advantage that our building engineer, Barry Sanders, has his own rain gauge at Tokomaro Bay, and he was there on site. So we actually could capture how much rain fell within a 12-hour period within that catchment. And then we, probably for the first time in our region, we actually used video footage from the locals and their Facebook posts to work out what the annual recurrence interval for the rainfall event was. And that's actually, from a community point of view, quite a cool thing, that their information really helped us understand what went on. And so the event was, to use the old terminology, between a 1 in 35-year event and a 1 in 100-year event. And my gut feeling, analysing it, it was around about a 75-year event. So it was in between those two. But it does highlight the fact that using that terminology, given that in fact we've had about 5 of these in the last 9 months, is that we need to use terms like 1 in 100-year event with significant caution. They're fine to actually give an indication of severity of an event, but they don't actually have any empirical value fundamentally. Particularly given the complex topography we have in the region. And I'm extremely grateful that NEMA have actually funded the work that we'll be doing shortly, which will actually give us a far better idea of how weather systems impact our region. But just as importantly, will actually allow us to calibrate where our rain gauge network and river flow networks are, because I think that will actually benefit the communities generally going forward. And Rather than go into really great detail, I know that there has been some discussion about particular issues in Arthur Street and in Toa Street in Tokomaru Bay. And my assessment is that irrespective of any issues with respect to blocked culverts on State Highway 35 at Toa Street, the volume of water that fell within such a short period of time would have overwhelmed any culvert anyway. And so it may have been exacerbated to the degree of flooding, but looking at the video footage of the overland flow coming down those hills on the north side of State Highway 35, Toa Street would have got flooded anyway. And I guess that's the key thing. And with respect to Arthur Street, the photographs in my report, you can see that the river was well and truly out of its banks for quite a considerable distance upstream. And it's just unfortunate that that event there, the road was the river as much as anything else. And if you've been there and you can think about when you just go over the Kaiwha Bridge, to think that the river took up the entire road width from just below there all the way through, just gives you a highlight about how significant the event was. So in Arthur Street's case, unfortunately, that's the lowest lying part of that area. And so it was going to get inundated and in such an event, and the older willows in the river would have had negligible effect on the actual extent of that flow. There was just nowhere for that water to go. It was a flash flood of significance, and they were unfortunately were just the ones in the gun barrel. And but it does raise the issues, which is obviously for council and others about what we do, seeing Arthur Street has had flooding twice in 1 year, about the resilience and vulnerability of that site. And my general view is that apart from that, we identified that the landfill, the legacy landfill from Cook County days at Tokomaru Bay is extremely vulnerable. And it became even more vulnerable after this event this year. And essentially the most prudent thing to do with that landfill is, and that's not the transfer station sitting on top of it, but the landfill underneath, is to remove it. And we've been in discussions with the relevant people within MPI about whether or not there is funding available for that, and that will work through an iteration to do that. It's not a cheap task. We also have a rivers expert from Massey University looking at what the impacts of removing that landfill will be on the flow in the Mangahoani River. And it will effectively allow, at the moment it sits out into the river like a big thumb. It influences the flow and the erosion downstream, but we want to know what impact removing that, actually restoring it to a natural riverbed at the point of that landfill will have on the river, and the benefits that will have downstream and any risks that there may be downstream, so that any work done is actually done with the best knowledge at hand. And apart from that, I actually think that probably it's best if I just answer any questions that councillors may have.
Awesome, thank you very much, Dr. Cave. I have Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Cave. It's really good to have all that material in one place. It's just a shame to have to write another one now. And I just draw people's attention to even to page 37 and the school, and you can see that looks like a moderate amount of water. But if you look closely at the photograph, you can see the silt. And in fact, so that water was a whole lot deeper earlier in the morning.
So that's page 37 of the report, but 58 of our agenda.
Yeah, 37 of the new paper that's sitting on the table, and the school had water through it. The photos are fantastic because I think it really does tell a story of what the local people lived through. And I would hate to think that I appreciate entirely your comments about the culvert, because I read this report, or the copy we have in our agenda, and the NZTA, but we shouldn't come to think that blocked culverts don't need to be cleared. I mean, block culverts across our district, our council roads and NZTA, we really do need to make sure we keep the pressure on keeping block culverts open, because they're only put in a place like wherever for a purpose of reason of letting water flow. So I'm totally understanding the background to the comment you're making here. We should make sure we keep all our culverts functioning, and I'm sure come 1 July, we'll have a whole lot more money to make those culverts, get those culverts cleared on our own roads, and NZTA keep the pressure on the clearance of their own culverts. And while it might not have stopped it, it might have just maybe slowed it a little. But it's an excellent report and a really good record to have, and very good that you have been able to use the photographs from the local community who were on site at the time. It just shows, you know, no one would expect water to flow through the main street of Tolaga Bay, as on page 7 of this report. And it just shows, you know, we all drive there all the time and think that that's township is well above the level of the river, which it was. But to see that water flowing through there at the June 21 report is really telling. So thank you, Dr. Cade, for the work in this report.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Seymour, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Sheldrake, Councillor Gregory, Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I have a few, so I'll just go through them one by one. So the first question is just on page 66 of the tabled report around the recommendations. So I know some of those we've already kind of put in place. Is that the outcome of this report? Is that we're approving those recommendations, or are they already set in stone?
Which page are you talking about?
66 and 67 of the tabled report.
Let me just get to that.
Through the chair, the recommendations that have already been, so some of them have already been progressed, but as part of the engagement with the Tokomaru Bay community, there might be some more that we may want to add to that as well.
Yeah, and just thanks for the report. I think it's important in combating misinformation. There's a lot of things here that are kind of clearing things up, and also providing some education to the region. And I think it kind of allows a clear determination of responsibilities, you know, what we can solve as GDC and what private property holders can solve, and also clearing out some maybe inevitabilities. And that's what my next question is, what's coming out of this in terms of strategies for, you know, now that it's not a 1 in 100 year event, now there's almost 1 in 6 months. What are the solutions? Have we identified areas that are just basically red zones, and what can be solutions that can be put in place?
Through the chair, so there's the next piece of work, which thankfully we've got some funding which will feed, we'll talk about that later on in the report, which will feed into that. We've also got Tonkin Taylor working as part of our resource management plan and some base information, doing some hazard risk assessment across the region. Part of that is a specific focus on the 2022 event in Tokomaru, Anoda, Kaiawa, looking around there and assessing what council could be doing by way of further infrastructure, or what the community can be doing. Not on the agenda, but just recently at the regional sector group meeting, the regional sectors put forward a funding request to central government. So it was, you may recall, the flood control scheme work. So there's about $150 million worth being requested that will go across New Zealand, with flooding being our #1 hazard. And that's looking at a contribution from the Crown because of the assets that are being protected, but also a contribution from local authorities for the infrastructure that they provide, and bringing in insurance to look at what they can do on the ground with the houses that are affected. They've got a case study which they're using Bulla to look at a private public local government, central government, private partnership around how can we create a sustainable framework going forward with climate change to address these issues. I've suggested that Tairāwhiti could be another case study, just in terms of we don't have the population density like it was affected in terms of Bulla, but the impacts on iwi hapu connection to whenua is just as great in terms of the cultural significance that may be impacted through future events like this. So that's an unfolding space, but I can bring some more information back in terms of that request that went from the regional sector to ministers.
Yeah, and that kind of answers my next question about identifying, GDC, public and private. I guess we are limited by private contributions because of, as you said, the population density. It's a high cost per user, and particularly for the ratepayer. And I think we're probably going to have to rely a lot more on central government as part of that climate change funding. The last one I was just going to cover off. So with that, all the helpful information that was provided by the public via Facebook feeds, as part of this HUI, can the communication go out and say, these are the kind of things that we're looking for? So then that information can be provided, being a community that's quite helpful in that respect. So if they're kind of a list of things that you would like to see from people on the ground, and then they can provide that information if there are future events.
Yes, after events, I tend to be fairly active in approaching people when I see useful information on Facebook and other places. And then after this event in last year, I visited quite a number of the people who took photographs and essentially interviewed them, got a very personal impression of the impacts. And I think it's quite important that, they're the ones affected, and so that we actually take their views on board. And I think what I'd actually really like to see for the final version of this report is, in actual fact, another section, which is from local community documenting that event.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Kay. Do you have a comment to make? Perhaps?
So, through the chair and Councillor Hughes, sorry, I didn't address the other part of the question in terms of future planning and in particular the comment around red zones, because that came up at the Tokomaru Bay Community Hui, the concern that that's where council might go. And I just wanted to just clarify that there's a lot more work, underpinning work and evidence-based and conversations to happen before any decisions like that would happen, as did in Matata, because I think that was a real concern. And council, certainly you wouldn't want to go into that red zone space until you've had years of dialogue around what to do there. So and it is very much now it's very much about educating the community around the climate change impacts, and as a partnership approach that we need to have with our community, our hapu and iwi, to do that. But I think the message has landed on the ground that climate change is happening, and these are the impacts of it.
Thank you very much, Madam C. Councillor Sheldrake, then Councillor Gregory.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Cave and Ben, everybody, for your work. I'd add my compliments there. I think this reporting is just fantastic, and obviously you're building a history for future generations. We'll be saying, hey, back in 2022 this happened. Just a couple of general things, really. I mean, I look at these photos and the amount of slash still coming down. Is it got a bit softer, the amount of forestry waste coming down, or is it still as extreme?
I guess at this stage, we're still doing an evaluation of woody debris on the beaches. The last one was Te Kapa Beach at near Ruatoria on last Sunday. There's still some beaches to go, and we're also involving the local community to assist us with those assessments, so that we have a methodology which was adopted in 2017 after Cyclone Cook, which we then applied in subsequent years after all the events. And some of the material is getting softer, but we have material buried on the beach which has been exhumed, some of which may go back 20 or 30 years. And so I think my phrase in 2018 was that this was a gift that's going to keep on giving. And I think that's certainly the case. In our assessment of this event in March this year, we've canvassed a lot of the district, and we are seeing that there is still material in vulnerable sites within the catchments, which is still not reached the sea. So this is a big hairy problem, and it's one that we need to actually go through that process of determining what the situation are, what the facts are, what the type of material is, and then I guess that would be something for council to consider later when that documentation is achieved.
Thank you. Just in one supplementary one. So what's the process for prioritising the work? I mean, obviously the Tokomara Bay Bridge had to be done straight up, but the other work and, you know, how will you pick, we'll go into this region before that region? You know, what's the longer term process of prioritising reinstatement?
Through you, Chair. So the teams that are working now at the moment around where reinstatement will be prioritised. There's a number of factors into it. The big push has been around where people are cut off. It's now around restoring access where we have available contractors and materials. So a lot of the work in the background at the moment is actually procurement, assessing what's there, what's the approach that needs to be taken, but then actually getting contractors on site, getting materials on site and getting the work underway for the response to make sure that the roads are safe. Then secondly, it's funding with Waka Kotahi and waiting for that to come through from them.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you, councillor Sheldrake. Councillor Gregory, then councillor Akata-Brown.
Thank you. Thank you for this extensive report. I was just concerned with, I just have a question regarding the summary point 19C. And there's a photo of this log later on page about 67 or something, 61, no, 62. And it says that it suggests movement of logs harvested. But I just wonder, with it being it looks like it's been through the Debaka to me, that log. And I just think maybe it could have also fallen off a boat and maybe not necessarily what it says it is there. That's all.
For that comment, councillor Gregory. Do we want to respond to that or?
Yeah, the dealing with it falling off a boat, first of all, there has to be a boat in the area at the particular time, but also Tolaga Bay is actually a closed system from a circulation point of view, and not aware of any boats that actually had any problems losing logs, but also it hasn't been coated with biocide, which is normally would suggest that it's come off a ship. And if it's fallen off a truck, the truck would have to be extremely close to a waterway for that to happen. Yes, it has been through a water. We have a methodology for determining essentially how old logs are, whether or not they actually have come from a forestry site versus being windthrow or just eroded from a riverbank. And so those Waratah marks are one of the clear signs that gets preserved. Doesn't necessarily tell you how old the log is, but how sharp those ends are is a pretty good indicator. And the fact that it's still got a paint mark on it. That same log is still there on the beach. It's moved from the river mouth where that photograph was taken down to the right at the north end, and now in this last storm it's moved all the way back to the river mouth again, so highlighting the fact that it's a mobile system but enclosed, and we don't know where that log came from. The paint mark is indeterminate and it's only one log, and that was the only significant fresh cut log identified after that event.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cave. Councillor Akuhata-Brown.
Morena, my apologies for being late today. I was dealing with a domestic incident. Listen, I like everyone in the room, appreciate all the work that's gone into this in light of all the events that we are currently experiencing as a region. It's highlighting, as you say, Dr. Cave, the need for us to actually not consider thinking of these events as the, kind of plants a seed really of these 1 and 100, and then we're having them every other day. So first I want to make some comments regarding firstly the standout feature overall, I guess for me, is seeing the people that live in the region who know their place, etc., their impact to the helping and supportive nature, as well as the photographs. I'm grateful that you did interview and get those personal stories, because often we don't get to see that personal impact based on events that are happening and reoccurring into schools, into businesses, into families' lives. So I do think it behoves us as city councillors who live city to check it out, to be able to go into those spaces to see. Now, I appreciate we can't just go up there and rubberneck for the sake of it. It's actually about a chance to see the first-hand impacts, so that when we're doing our representation role, we are understanding the overarching issues that face all our region. So thank you to Councillor Seymour really for allowing that space to happen, and obviously Mr. Foster, Councillor Foster got to go. I do think, because we've been and had a chance to look at our region as councillors, we do a road trip where we see the overlays, the impacts. We've seen hugely, the impact on flow effects from Cyclone Bola. So I just want to know whether we can, get an overarching view to seeing the impact, because as Councillor Gregory has just noted, I think it's important that we just reinforce and remind all forestry logging businesses the importance of their pits or whatever, the skid sites being managed well, based on the fact that we are still seeing the source of a log that wasn't identified, but we just know it comes from forestry, respect to this region's use. So, that was something I thought, sad that we're kind of trying to identify it, but I think it's just a chance to reinforce and remind all businesses working on landscape that is subject to weather conditions such as these, to, perhaps be reminded of the importance of safety and also environmental. The other thing was, the balance of water storage versus, so we get all this water coming down and then we're debating water usage type thing. So wanting if in the mix, how we collect some of this gold in these regions that have a certain amount come down quite a lot, to the science that we need for those when we're looking at an aquifer construct. So I'm just trying to work out the balancing act of large amounts of water at a set time that we have to deal with, and then the future proofing framework of that water. So what can we be looking at in the strategy to collect it, be it in the East Coast and regions in the Western spaces as well. And then my three kind of main questions were really following on from Councillor Cranston, the preparedness overall of us as a region, because we know that these events are happening, and we know regions get hit, and people have had, this is the second time, third time. Are we looking to move marae inland? Is there going to be a significant strategy to determine, the preparedness of all people? Because people see the event, they're part of the event, and then those who are not, some people just it's raining, and they just stayed inside, or what I mean. There's a group of our populace that don't realise the impact of these actual events. So I feel like we need a reminder, but even in the urban sector, that these events have impacted on landscape, on hills, houses, etc. So I just wanted, is that a part? I'll leave that as my first question. Preparedness overall, have these events made us as a region better prepared, or more understanding we need to be prepared?
Thanks, Councillor. Great question. And it comes down to really, particularly with the group plan, a key component of that work is around the hazard, what our hazards are. So the order of priority, as we've indicated, flooding certainly would certainly be in the top two for that. The impact, particularly with recent events, when I talk about Matauranga Māori context in terms of historical reference to that, well, really the reality of what these recent events have shown is that we're actually developing historical context in terms of this year, or the last year, I should say, in that regard there. So it's certainly, it's outside of my remit or expertise, but there's certainly the impacts of climate change, and you're heading into the sort of subjects around, people make the choice where they live, knowing that what happens there is living there still tenable in terms of really a future decision. And equally, that's a wider discussion in terms of that. But for our role, particularly around that readiness and preparedness, is around reinforcing really the hazard relevant to each area. And that's a key part of what our outreach and particularly engagement with community groups and Community Link focus on. And rather than trying to get a whole regional context of hazards, it's really very localised in terms of Wharekaiaka, for example. You have a flood risk there and a significant tsunami risk based on the Hikurangi activity that's 108 kilometres offshore then. So you've got to be able to plan for and accept. You choose to live in that area, you mitigate risk and hazard by having a plan and knowing what you need to do. And that's really the crux of what we set out to achieve.
Yes, my, oh, sorry.
Through Mr. Chair, just to back Ben up on this, at a national level, we're also pushing the preparedness message. We have a Get Prepared website that we've just revamped, and it's just been released. And it's now up to international standards. It's in Te Reo Māori, it's in Audible, it's in large print, and it also supplies us guidance to the groups, and they can actually change it a little bit to target those. And also, we've just also released a national app in respect of tsunami evacuation zones. So people can actually go on that and work out where they are and how to do it to obviously assist the risk preparedness for the group.
I guess it's really important to reinforce and remind and keep on letting residents know to just not, get back into, kind of lays off, kind of it happened and now we move on type of thing. So thanks for that. My second question was around resources. And I do love that in your recommendations, better fact finding engagement with affected communities. So did we manage to pick up, I see Mr. Sanders' brain gauge was acknowledged in the report too. So have we picked up new resources, be it people, marae, those frameworks? Because I know that as a council, a lot of people expect us to actually cover off so much when in actual fact we're in a relationship with our ratepayer if they can come on board and help support with resources, which I saw that happened in this space, which it will, because our region has good people who want to help out. So have we got more resources now in regard to helping with preparedness based on this report?
So I'll talk to the CEDAM aspect of that, which is really resourcing. Well, what comes to life is, I describe it as a circuit board. You plug it in and it lights up, and that's our community link by grouping. So that certainly has reaped the benefit, which I guess is an upside of these events in terms of what it takes to come together and how we connect to that. And an aspect of, I guess I spoke about enhancements to the current way we've done response previously. So that group comes together as a collective during the event online. Of course, we use technology until it fails, and the ability to do that quickly connects them, probably in a better, more efficient manner than trying to deal with them individually, given a lot of the time it's time-sensitive information, critical decision-making, but certainly the critical decision-making, the key thing is that's vested here. It's the role of the group control in terms of assets and deployment of helicopters and those sort of things. And that's part of the education or training construct that we've got really in terms of that enhancement to the engagement we have underway. And I guess the start point was that some areas, the community link groups have had to reform. And that's just as a nature of just being allowed to drift and not being engaged in that regional collective sense. But that's a key work stream for us in terms of actually we'll be reporting on that and equally developing the work plan that will, articulate, particularly for councillors, the work that's going in and the priority we've got across the 4 Rs and how we're aligning our key, I guess, strategic outputs to our plan, and really where that purchase order or purchase agreement really that we're discharged to fulfill, will certainly connect with that.
Thank you so much. And my final was just really about the future proofing for region, what's best for region. Can this report, that I know it's draft now, but can it be used to inform whether forestry in set parts of region should be deforested based on the fact of its impact? Is that not what this could be useful? I just sense that we need to look at a bigger kind of construct of what's impacting, the whole region's environments, the ecology, etc. So it's not for that purpose. But can it be into them to consider?
Through the chair, no, it's not the purpose of that report, and that's bigger land use decisions that need to be taken as part of your resource management plan review.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cranston and Councillor Sue.
Yeah, just going back a little bit to Terry's point, the Tolaga Bay, the slash on the beach there, the event even earlier than this one where we had a collaboration with the forestry to clean up that beach with the furnacing and that. Is that ongoing or did it have an end point to it?
Through the chair, that was a one-off, and you'll recall that the council then approved budget for, I think it was about $120,000 for us to then clean up this beach because there is no more resource and funding available. So as part of the bigger plan was that there was the short intervention around let's get the beaches clean for summer. Then let's look at how we can over the medium to long term address the region's issue around slash. Given we do have forestry activities and that's around for the foreseeable future.
The outcome of that work, is that something we really would
I-
focus on as a beach cleanup? Is
I
it a good
believe that there
system?
might be something on the operations agenda. I just have to check.
Right.
But that was, we were going to bring some more work back to council, another report back to council.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you very much, Chair. The comment around the one log and the photographs brings me to use my lateral thinking. And on page 55, there's a very good photograph of the Tukumara Bay Wharf and the wooden piles that actually are quite a significant risk. And for years, for anyone who's not familiar with them, they sit in the water, they're partially secured at the bottom, and they go round and round and round like that with every surge of the tide. Now, it would be really good if somehow within the mechanism, because they're a risk, they will be freed and randomly are. Is there some way that we can secure some funding? Because that bit of the wharf at the end should be demolished, and we could assist the Tukumara Bay people who are trying to restore the rest of their wharf with some emergency funding that took that danger out from the sea, because that is actually a resource that GDC owns. And I seriously tell you, it doesn't even take a big swell to make those, what were once upon a time, the uprights to the wharf to swing around, and they do. So those, while we've talked about one log that appeared on a beach somewhere else, those could easily appear on a beach anywhere. So I think we should flag that we should try to find some funds to remove those and assist the Tukumara Bay Wharf people with the restoration, because sometime that is going to have to happen. And that the wharf restoration project is not to extend where that wooden part was, because that was going to be hugely, hugely expensive. So the restoration project that the trust have been working at for years is to restore the part which has concrete piles, which is on the left of your photograph. So I just flag that for a bit of attention would be so cool, and I know they would be really keen to get in behind if there's some way, some funding authority, i.e. the government, can assist us to remove that danger from the sea at Tukumara Bay. And just to those who've talked about slash, and no one likes to see slash, but there's what's on the beach at Tolaga is quite small, and it's been referred to in the report. It's little stuff that was been in the rivers for quite some time, and every time the water goes up, it picks up a bit more of it and brings it down. And as Mr. Cave has said, some of it is regurgitated within the sand at the front, but it's quite small. It's not logs like we saw in 2018. But I'd love the chief executive to make a note and pursue maybe some issues around it. We can see that Tukumara Bay Wharf, because that is a danger. I mean, it's just as dangerous as a log coming down a river. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour, ask the seat to respond.
Thank you, Councillor Seymour. So just in terms of the slash, sorry, there isn't a paper coming to operations in June. I thought there was, but there is that we did have one at the audit and risk in our operations outlining the next steps in terms of addressing it from a regional approach. So I can pull that back up in terms of the key dates. Just in terms of the Tukumara Bay Wharf laws, we would struggle to argue that this is a priority at this stage in terms of the risk assessment and the recovery work that needs to be done now. So if we were to, I would say, well, what would be lost? What's the opportunity lost in terms of other investment that's required into the region that directly impacts on our people, like our roads, like their houses, the silt, the other areas, as opposed to what's sitting out into the sea. That is not necessarily a significant risk to human.
No, but it might be an opportunity while government is throwing some money at our region that we should line up all the projects that should be attended to. Certainly that trust has worked really hard to try to get the money to do the restoration themselves. And I guess at that point, then the removal of those dangerous piles would occur. But we all need, it's a good opportunity to remind urban councillors that that's what goes on up there.
Thank you, Councillor Seymour. Councillor Carter-Brown.
Just wanted to ask, sorry, I know it was talked of was the culverts. Are they on a regulated program of being checked? Like how does, like we often hear about a blocked culvert. So did they go on that like a roading register of check this culvert while you're out there, or is it just when it's in a full state of?
Through the chair, we have a budget, we go through that, but through the chair, this is an operations discussion as opposed to civil defence.
I guess
meeting.
I'm asking it because it's in a report and it's noted, and we often get talks at rural meetings around culverts. So overall then, in a bigger picture, looking down on this, when we're looking at infrastructure that's causing concern, is that just in a programmed work operation?
Through
So,
the-
well, sorry.
So through the chair, we have a budget to do the culverts and drainage for the district. As we've previously made the council aware, it's not enough to keep across the damage that we get across the whole of the district throughout the year. So we have an inspection program where we go in and inspect. It's whether or not we have any budget to be able to clear all the culverts, and we don't this year, particularly because we've had so many wet weather events.
Thank you,
Can
Ms. Wilson.
I just make a comment through the chair? The reference to this was around the Wakapotahi culvert. So the question then needs to go back to the RTC in terms of their maintenance schedule around culverts. The other aspect of this is that Dr. Cave identified that the sheer volume of rain was the cause of this, not necessarily the block culvert. And that's what we need to be clear of, and that's what we need to be communicating to the community.
Yeah, and I'm grateful you've said that, because I think more and more people need to understand it is about the amount that comes down in the time frame it comes down. And as far as not all of us are climate change scientists, but I think for citizens to be prepared and understanding it, those are kind of messagings that need, to qualify the fact that, because as you say, we will often get hammered about infrastructure, be it that we want to pressure, we'll put more pressure on SETA or Wakapotahi to do their part. Such so, but it's all connected. But I do think in the preparedness space, our client science minds, which are average everyday persons, perhaps not realising how impacting these rainstorm events are when we have so much at once. But again, I could talk to you about lots of things. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Akuhata-Brown. Hey, I do have one question, and it's kind of off the back of something that you had mentioned before, Madam C. It was about future planning, and how you'd see that there's a separate piece of work kind of going on. And I'm taking kind of a Mātauranga Māori perspective in regards to this. Traditionally, if floodwaters had hit, then whānau would pick up, well, there were actually several options. Whānau would pick up pa and move them, or would raise them themselves, or provide, I've also heard of a mechanism where a po was put into that marae, and if it flooded, the marae would raise up, and it would, like, everyone would evacuate, and the marae would raise up, and then once the flood stopped, it would come back down and people would reoccupy the pa. But underpinning all of that was kind of mana motuhake, right? The ability to be able to shift pa from sites, to shift whare from sites. Are those points being spoken about in those spaces you alluded to before in regards to that separate piece of work?
Excellent question through the chair. So that's certainly part of our regional thinking. Te Puni Kōkiri are looking at leading out on a piece of work, particularly around whenua Māori and the impact that flooding has had from an economic and cultural perspective. Certainly in the National Adaptation Climate Change Plan, there is the Te Ao Māori framework, and applying Mātauranga Māori in terms of having a resilience and a resilient approach to climate change adaptation. So everything's weaving through, because for the points that you have raised, that this is not new for some of our communities, and there are traditions or history that provides insights to where they might go to in the future. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Madam C. I will consider that attachment thoroughly thrashed and investigated and spoken about. Thank you very much, councillors, for the rigour in which we ask questions. I'd like to put it to us. Do we want to break for a short morning tea now, and then we'll pick up the other papers after short morning tea. All right, we'll break this for morning tea. We'll come back in about 10 minutes, 10:25. Well, thank you very much, councillors and staff. Before we move on, I just received a text from the mayor. Councillors Dowsing and Woolsnop did give their apologies to her. She's only just seen them now. She's been busy since 6 a.m. this morning with, that's what time she started. So, okay. So moved by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Cranston. Acceptance of the apologies. Thank you very much. We will move on to the next. What I'll do is I'll take the next two attachments together because they're about the same thing. They're about the March, April 2022 event. So that's attachment 2 and 3 on page. Attachment 2 is on page 90. Attachment 3 is on page 100. Who will be speaking to that? Oh, Mr. Beatty. Good to see you, everyone. So would you like to make any comments in regards to attachments 2 or 3 prior to us asking questions?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. Kia ora tātou. So recovery, we've been very, very busy. I'm sort of trying to think about what makes the most sense in terms of on-train counsellors and group into this particular space. In terms of transition from response to recovery, we have the transition report, which is attached. We were lucky to, fortunate to have the assistance of Julian Verity, who's the Principal Advisor for Recovery and Emergency Management Bay of Plenty, who was here on site and assisted us in that transition period from response over into recovery and had a large hand in preparing the transition report. It's interesting, if we wrote that report again today, there are large chunks of it which might be quite different because we now know a lot more, sort of 5-6 weeks on. We had a transition notice as well, so that notice has actually come to pass, but the purpose of that was to take the powers of the controller in a declared event across to the recovery process for a period of time. I think it was 28 days, Ian can correct me if I'm wrong there, and all those powers come across with the exception of requisitioning. Probably the one power I was looking forward to using. Anyways, I digress. We also have in place, and we still have in place, what they call a designation of area under for building emergency management. So it's done under the Building Act, and we need to review that every 19 days. So that just allows us in the recovery space to utilise a number of emergency powers as relates to buildings over that period of time. So I think in a sense, the path that we've taken has probably been quite similar to the Buller event, where they had those sorts of notices and designated areas in play as well. Internally, we've formed up a recovery office, working across those 4 environments, community, natural and rural, natural environment, built and economic. Our chief goals are to reconnect community, restore our natural environment, rebuild our infrastructure, our built environment, and regenerate our economy. Our team's been head down, bum up, working across multiple agencies. So this isn't GDC going it alone. Recovery is about the coordinated efforts of multiple agencies and organisations and individuals working towards restoring our community. It's got a real long tail to it. So in terms of the 4 R's that sit in civil defence, you've got the readiness, you've got reduction, readiness, response. So response is that big hit when the emergency occurs, and then a long tail of recovery. At this stage, we're looking possibly up to 2-3 years if you want to take everything into account. We have a partnership meeting that's set up with all those multiple agencies. Some sort of between 35 and 40 people attend these meetings. We've got our 4th meeting of that nature coming up next week. So that's all the agencies under one roof talking through the recovery process. So those agencies won't come as any surprise to you. The Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Primary Industries, Ministry of Education. So we've had 3 schools impacted by this event. Everyone knows the story about Hātio. No sooner had they opened their doors, they had to close them again some 6 or 7 weeks after the fact. The Makarika School, people will know about significant silting in that area. There's some big questions, I think, for the Ministry of Education in terms of longer term solutions for schools with the nature of the events that we're having here in Tairāwhiti. We also have a kohanga reo that's been impacted. And so working with the National Kohanga Reo Trust on that front, we've got a specific hui just set up for education. That's a coordinated group of the principals, the kaiako at the Kohanga Reo, the BOT chairs. In the case of Makarika, they've got a limited statutory manager in place. And a whole pile of consultants working for the ministry and the ministry itself, as well as our team here at GDC to understand where we can connect, collaborate and coordinate our efforts together. Murray and others have spoken to the Mangahauini stream, which has had quite an impact on the Kura Kaupapa Māori at Tokomaru there. The team are needing to do remedial work in terms of the groins next to the river there, and work with the ministry who'll do the land reinstatement side of the equation. There's a lot of pressure in the whole recovery effort around access to contractors. There's only so many people who can do this sort of work in our community, and given the scale of the event and the work required, having that capacity to do everything at once is limited. So some coordination required there as well. I'm not going to speak to roads. Everyone knows what's happening with roads. There's been an inordinate amount of work done in the roading network, and there's an inordinate amount of work still required. Dave's got an awesome team working in that space, and Waka Kotahi are doing a huge amount of work as well. In the SIT rep, you'll see links where you can get all that update information, and when I mean it's up to date, that's where the people in the know refer you to. So I don't go anywhere else anymore, because the answer is always the same. It's on the website, and that's where you can get that information. What else did I want to mention by way of update? Funding's been an interesting space to work in. There are multiple agencies with different types of funding available. The Lotteries Commission has a tranche of funding and quite specific around what they can assist with, largely associated with community infrastructure, etc. The Enhanced Task Force Green has been stood up by the Ministry of Social Development, so $500,000 put into that space, led out by MSD across the Wairoa and Gisborne regions. MSD have contracted Tūranga Araro to deliver the work on the ground, and an intermediary is the Rural Support Trust. So the Rural Support Trust's role is to, I guess, get all the information in about the people that need their assistance on the ground, and then coordinate with Tūranga Araro to deliver the mahi. In addition to that, they're using it sort of as a win-win, not only doing the work on the ground, but also as an employment opportunity for people who are looking for work. It's unskilled labour for the most part. So we know in our community, and even stretching down into Wairoa, that there's a huge amount of work required for heavy type machinery, and we're not going to get that out of the Enhanced Task Force Green space. Dave's team in our waste management space have done a lot of work to ensure that we've got the capacity and I guess the processes in place to take in the silt. We've unlike, Wairoa's been impacted with some silting as well, but we seem to have worn the brunt of the silting impact here on the coast. Makarika School's a classic example. They've got large quantities of silt. And so the team on the ground here, we've got opportunities for people that are SHE approved under our health and safety to use a particular site. And we've also got another area which I think will be accessed to a large extent by the Enhanced Task Force Green environment. Still working and keeping a watching brief in terms of temporary accommodation services with MB. I just know that we have still got whānau living with other whānau, and there may come a point in time where they may have to find alternative options for their accommodation, and so there's a continuing brief being watched there with our friends at MB. Working closely with Te Puni Kōkiri as well. Nadine mentioned this earlier, they have got a significant amount of work going on in terms of resilience for, whenua Māori, marae, etc. We're having a catch up with them very shortly just to understand what intel they've got, so we can do a bit of a gap analysis and ensure that we're speaking of the same song sheet, or where they know more than us and vice versa, that we're connecting that information together. Also connected our GIS teams together as well, just to understand the impacts of the event. Ministry of Primary Industries have provided funding, which is split across Taidawa, Gisborne and Wairoa as well. Part of that funding, there was a carve out to fund Federated Farmers on behalf of our 2 regions to do an impact assessment survey. That's basically, they are calling up to 600-700 properties and property owners and have a whole survey that's connected into our GIS system, Survey 123 ArcGIS, to build a lot more intelligence around the impacts of the event on the ground. We're still learning more every day. You know, I think I've kind of got a real handle on the impacts of this event, or successive events, if you like. And there'll be something come through my inbox. I was like, well, why didn't you tell us earlier? So part of the work that they're doing will help to build a more significant picture on the ground of the impacts of the event. And we'll couple that with all our environmental information, all our GIS information to get our heads around the scale of the event. I think that's probably all I wanted to say at this point. I'm glad that we've now got a good sense of rhythm and coordination going on across the agencies. You know, in the sort of first couple of weeks, it's always an interesting space to work in, but pulling people together and getting some coordination going. Once you've set that rhythm and set that pace, I think it's now just working that through. The recovery plan itself is looking good, and we hope to have that fully finalised, I would think, next week. We've done a bit of a revamp in that space. It was a bit of a stop-start, given that we had the flooding event and then all of a sudden there was a cyclone, and sort of had to push pause momentarily. But we're back into the swing of things on the recovery front. So happy to take questions. I might have all the answers. The SITREP that you've got in your pack there is SITREP 3. We're now up to SITREP 5, but what I have covered off just for your purposes are some of those key highlights in terms of changes, the standing up of the Mirror Relief Fund, etc. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Beattie, for a comprehensive report. Got Councillor Cranston and Councillor Seymour.
Yeah, it's a little bit out of scope for your hat, but there's a comment that came under funding that reminded me. During the flooding events, there's quite often commentary going around saying, oh, quick, where do I get sandbags? Have we got stockpiled sandbags somewhere, and are they strategically placed and accessible?
Mr. Wilson.
So through the chair, we have a number of sandbags that we hold with Fulton Hogan. So Fulton Hogan have got a few hundred here in town at their depot. Then we have another lot out at Tikaraka. We don't supply sandbags for private property. We try not to. It's something that homeowners need to take care of themselves, and there are a number of places in town that they are able to get those from should they want to get them.
The comments would be for protection of personal property. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Cranston. Councillor Seymour, then Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that report. Without getting into the detail, can you just please advise whether what is the current status of the Te Puka Tavern? Because that's a very significant community facility in Tukumara Bay. Without getting into the detail, I just want that status updated, please.
Yeah, so the Tavern has a Section 124 notice under the Building Act, which is about dangerous and unsanitary buildings at this stage. So that's my understanding of the current status.
Thank you. This is very significant.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Murray Bay. Thank you.
Just to outline more about that, they had a landslide that went through into their food storage area, and sewage and water went through their restaurant area. And as part of their license, that meant they couldn't open the bar, even though that area wasn't affected purely because they couldn't provide food. They, like everybody else, is subject to the same issues with getting contractors to do the work as everybody else is. And that's but until that work is done, and until there's some issues with stabilising that hill behind, there are some risks associated with that site.
Can I just make a quick comment? I appreciate it's a significant asset in the community, but a little bit hesitant to talk about individual properties in this forum. I think there's a time and place for that. I'm just conscious that, you know, there's some privacy concerns as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Beattie. Anything else? there,
Yes, I
councillor
did
Simon?
have a further question, and it does refer to page 108 of the report. And while Mr. Beattie said he wasn't going to discuss roading is a part of this report and access. So it talks here about the roading issues, and we absolutely, or most of us know how significant the roading issues are. Just touch base with Mr. Wilson on that matter. But it says, you know, this will increase cost, time and frustration. Can I assure you that is absolutely true? And the last bullet point there relates to roads requiring four-wheel access, which limits the community to safe travel, because not everyone has four-wheel drive. Now, where we have, and across the district, I'm sure we've got a lot, a relatively small number of farmers at the end of a road who are perfectly capable of purchasing a couple of truckloads of metal and putting them in the potholes. What is GDC going to say about that if they're not going to do any maintenance to these roads that are not the highest priority? And I completely get that, but they are quite significantly dangerous for the locals to use. There might only be a couple of farms beyond the location. They're dusty metal roads in summer and they're wet, boggy roads in winter, and they're much worse this winter. And the farmers would probably do that if they felt that nobody was going to come near them for a year or more. So what is our position on that, please?
Our position should be discussed through the chair at operations committee if we were concerned about people's roads, as opposed to what we're currently focusing on in civil defence around the recovery aspects, which we canvass quite in depth.
Yes,
with
so
council.
it relates to what's reported in this paper though. So I'm flagging that it can come up there, and when we're saying here, it challenges community to safe travel, and it challenges, it increases cost, time and frustration. So while I note that it was referred to that we discuss it in ops, I just think we need to be mindful. That is actually the reality. Our civil defence man is nodding. It's not just one road with potholes. I've been on several where a grader has made the road accessible. The minute it rains again, that road will become a stream because the road is actually lower. So I'm just asking, so we need to flag it that we can have a conversation, because some of the simple might be quite simple things that locals will be prepared to do themselves. It's never got that bad before, but it might be this time.
Point made, Councillor Seymour.
Thank you.
But we have undertaken that would be something that we'll discuss.
I did see Mr. Wilson's hand up, so we'll be able to respond.
Through you, Chair, happy to report on this at operations. There's a paper coming towards that regarding people undertaking works on the road. They are not able to, they are not allowed to do that. It's a health and safety risk and a liability to the Chief Executive. Only approved people are able to undertake works on the roads.
Thank you very much,
Mr. Wilson. I'm absolutely aware that's our normal position, and I absolutely get that. I've been around here long enough to know that. But if we're going to tell the public, once you get your assessment, that nothing will happen to their road for a year, I think we need to have some options. So I look forward to the paper. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seymour. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, just two questions on page 108. First one, the residential advisory service is what insurance matters. What role will council be playing with that if that is created?
Which bullet point?
Final bullet point under the insurance paragraph.
Right.
So what are you on page?
Page 108 of the agenda.
Page 108 under insurance.
Under
first
insurance.
bullet.
So
Last
it
bullet point.
says we need a residential advisory service. I just didn't know what role council.
Yeah, look, they're likely to involve us in that process. And we haven't had any reach out from people doing the insurance process at this stage, but if they need us, we're really closely connected with insurance people, I can promise you that. They're involved in our partnership environment. The most significant change that's occurred in the insurance space is that EQC are sort of working through the insurance direct now. So that changed last year. That's been quite a significant change. Instead of people having to contact EQC directly, they just work with the insurers. We haven't had, I don't know that that's fully set up for us, but if it is, we'll be involved.
Yeah, and then just the second question is just under the risks. So obviously the first two risks we have no control over, but the third one around resourcing of the recovery team, is that something we need to consider as a council putting more funds towards, or are there external funding agencies through the central government that we can apply to for resources for that, to help coordinate that?
I think in terms of the recovery office space that we've got set up at the moment, people have got some BAU that they've got to do as well. There may be a long-term discussion required around how we actually deal with recovery as an organisation, particularly given the successive events that we've been experiencing. There are avenues for funding to support it. I don't want to put Ian in the hot seat, but potentially access funding through NEMA, project management type funding. Yeah, something we have to consider.
I'll ask Ian to speak to that in the NEMA report. If there are no other questions in regards to these two appendices, I'll move us on to the NEMA appendices, which are 4 and 5, starting on page 124 and 126. Mr. Wilson, contributing to the Wilsonisation of our organisation. Kia ora, Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora. Before I start, I'd just like to actually congratulate the group on the response to these events. And when I say the group, I include the council, I include emergency services, I actually include the communities as well. It's a really big ask having this number of events in a very short time, and look, you've done it very, very well. It's been ably led from the CE, Mayor, Ben and Dave at the top, so the governance issues were really strong, and it really showed in this event. Oh, should I say these events? So no, well done. And then you've handed over to a really smooth transition to recovery, and you've stepped up in that aspect, and that's actually managing very well. So it's congratulations for that. Well done.
Thank you.
In respect of NEMA, Ben's already outlined the where we are in respect of legislative changes. We're actually at the sharp end of the stick at the moment, and the minister's hoping to introduce this bill after the local elections into government, and then get the first reading in October, November to a select committee, so that we could then put it out and get feedback from you in December, January, February, possibly March to that committee. Very tight timeframes, and we're also aware that it's probably not the best time after a local election, but we're having to make do with what we've got. We are working with the group managers as well in this aspect to actually work out how we can get this feedback from all the groups and from yourselves as well. Another aspect that sits in behind it is the review of our national order, or our guide. And that actually sets out the roles and responsibilities of all the groups and agencies in the country. At the moment, it's a little bit unwieldy and has a lot of items in there that really don't need to be in there. So we're trying to streamline that, have an emergency management bill, have some regulations, and also have some directors' guidelines. And in it, we will clearly set out the roles and functions at a national level, set out the roles and functions of NEMA, and then we'll come down to the regional and the local. So it'll be really clear what the roles and functions are, and it'll be quite succinct. We have set up 11 projects under that with members from all groups throughout New Zealand in it, and we'll obviously provide feedback to you. We're working on it at the moment. Hopefully you should have a look at it between, I guess, October and December this year, so you can actually look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. And aim is to actually have this in place by August next year, all going well.
Did you want to respond also to about the funding stuff?
Oh, yeah, the funding from James in respect to recovery. Yes, there is the ability. I was having a chat with your CEO about that and looking at how that can be supported. There are a number of avenues, and it generally requires I guess, a paper to come to us to say, look, we require further funding or special funding on that. It's not available to all, but if you put it up, it can be considered. So we'll actually have a look at that as well. Sorry, one thing you need to be aware also is, oh yeah, where we actually got our charges dismissed and thereby the groups dismissed at court last week in respect of Waikari Island, which is good news. The court has ruled that CDM does not have a role in providing public safety functions, advice on public safety functions. One thing I do need to bring to attention is we're going to test the emergency mobile alert this year, and it'll be done on the 22nd of May between 6 and 7 p.m. We will run a campaign prior to it, so everyone's aware that it's coming out and they're aware why they're getting it, what the actions are, and what their phones are doing. We've been criticised a little bit for that, so we're trying to actually update everyone on that. And that's probably me at the moment.
Awesome, thank you very
Happy to
much.
take questions.
Ian, do we have any questions? Councillor Seaman.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Can you just expand on the mobile alert? Is that not a siren? It's a text to phones?
This is the one that goes to your phones. This is
Thank
one
you.
that either the groups can activate or we can activate, and we're required by government to run 3 tests a year. 2 of them we announce, 1 we don't.
Thank you.
This is the announcement.
Awesome, thank you. Councillor Clutterbuck.
Just regarding.
Councillor Seaman,
oh,
sorry. No.
I mean, again, I'm just really cognizant that everyday citizens need to be really kind of kept in the loop and how they play a part overall. So I was just wondering whether the national framework still goes into schools, or I know there are other I guess people groups that go into schools to do work. So whether life education can add civil emergency plans. I know children and they enjoy the drop, stop, kind of hold, cover, holds, kind of framework. But I'm just wondering if we highlight, the need to be more, kind of intensive in school systems and spaces to just keep that highlight, because kids are great messengers to taking it home to talk to parents about, have we got sandbags? So I just wonder if be it on a regional scale, because there's always bonuses doing localized, spaces, and we've got a movie maker counsellor. So I just really, because I work in schools, I guess too, so there's a little bit of that. So is there like a national bet that we used to grow up listening to campaigns that really impacted our lives, like Be a Tidy Kiwi? So I just wondered if there's a national adage to promotion of preparedness.
Look, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Our tamariki are our best assets. They really do focus the parents and what they need to do and what not to do. We work at a national level with the Ministry of Education, providing and developing advice, but we do not step into the regional, local level. That's your responsibilities there. We'll provide those advices and assistance to do it. So we leave it there.
Thank you for that. I guess then I would ask our team, would we consider, because I know we had a fabulous consideration to our drainage issues, waste-wise, with the 3 Ps. So maybe preparedness campaign. Is that something we could look at as a local, bearing in mind we're now consciously aware of more events, so just wondering if we could do a local campaign promoting it with the stories we've connected to these events, just a highlight, I guess.
Through the chair. It'll take us back to March last year, in the week before the 5th of March. Prior to that, really, engagement with schools was piecemeal, was on request, ad hoc. But that week, particularly leading into the period from March, actually ran the collective engagement with all schools in Kura Kaupapa and ECE for the purpose of informing them around planning for, and equally really how to actually connect for emergency events. Now, the benefit of that, particularly imprinting tamariki, really they grow up, as you're alluding to, with the messaging, and really what is normalising really the fact that you live in the region with the specific hazards in terms of what do we do. By the time a 5-year-old turns into a 20-year-old, that's really part of BAU in terms of their household. So a key component really in terms of the wraparound with their national campaigns, and we align to 2 key activities for that every year. One of those being the national shakeout, or actually international shakeout campaign we ran into last year. Now, as comms team, as a sort of fence output, we resourced that quite significantly more than what we've done previous years. And that really, for us, the uptake for that probably far exceeded what we were looking at. But that got us into nationally the first ranked region in terms of the uptake for that messaging. So a key part of that community outreach for us really is around the themes we take both for community in the sense of our community link, but also key engagement, much as NEMA does at national level with education. For us, really the efficiency for a team is connecting with a collective as opposed to individual schools and doing it in that regard. But what we do to assist with that is certainly the templates to help with planning or connecting them with those that are actually very well advanced. I mean, Wainui School, for example, very well practiced, very well versed. In terms of someone who's starting, how do we do this? It's really, we will take the opportunity to connect and share and via the education office here on the regional level to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Green. Very comprehensive answer. Councillor Hughes.
Just really quick one about the emergency management bill. Would that include like a, as part of the scope of funding framework? So it's less ad hoc or?
Funding is actually being looked at in the bill, yes. How to scope it? Yeah, probably as well.
Okay, if there are no other questions in regards to 4 and 5, I will take us to our final attachment there, which is attachment 6, the CDM Resilience Fund project application form. Is staff going to speak to this, or is it just for Dr. Cave? Dr. Cave, do you have any comments in regards to attachment 6, the fund application, or just want to take it as read and ask any questions? Cool. Thank you very much, Mr. Cave. Do we have any questions in regards to this funding application? Okay, shaking of heads all around. In that case, I will take us back to page 9, which is our decision, and the decision that we're making is to approve this assessment for circulation with the Tokomaru Bay community. Moved by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Sheldrick. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much for your time today, councillors. Thank you very much for your time today, staff. I declare this meeting closed. Kia ora.